Black Maid. Stole billionaire's money to save. Her dying daughter. His reaction. Left everyone speechless. Angela Brown was a woman of quiet strength, though the world rarely noticed. Every morning before the sun rose, she dressed in her worn uniform, tied back her hair, and left for the mansion where she worked as a maid. The mansion belonged to Victor Kane, a billionaire whose name commanded fear and respect in equal measure. To him, Angela was invisible, a shadow who scrubbed his floors and polished his silver. To Angela, the long hours and meager pay were simply survival. But behind her calm smile hid a storm. At home, her 8-year-old daughter Maya lay sick. In bed, her little body weakened by a heart condition that grew worse each day. Doctors had been clear. Without immediate surgery, Maya might not live to see another month. The surgery, however, came with a price tag Angela could never afford, even if she worked 10 lifetimes. Desperation clawed at Angela's heart as she searched for help. She walked to banks and pleaded for loans, only to be turned away because her pay was too small, her credit too thin. She reached out to charities, but each reply came with the same cold rejection. "We're sorry. We can't help you with this." Time. Even friends avoided her, afraid to lend money they knew she could never repay. Every door slammed in her face while at the mansion, Victor Kane flaunted his wealth without a care. Angela saw it daily. Diamonds gifted to women at parties, luxury cars delivered as if they were groceries, and private jets that flew him to dinners halfway across the world. The contrast made her heart ache. Her daughter was dying, and yet she spent her days dusting the golden frames of a man who could save her with a single check. One evening, while cleaning Victor's study, Angela's tired eyes fell on something unusual. The bottom drawer of his massive desk was slightly open. Out of habit, she pushed it closed, but as she did, the glint of crisp $100 bills caught her eye. She froze. Pulling the drawer open, her breath caught in her throat. Inside were neat stacks of cash, bundled and untouched, as if forgotten. Angela's heart began to race. She looked around the room, half expecting Victor to appear at the door, but the mansion was quiet. Her hands trembled as her mind screamed at her to close the drawer, to walk away. She had been raised to believe stealing was wrong, a sin that destroyed lives. But another thought pushed against her fear. What about Maya? What about her daughter's life slipping away because the world had turned its back? Tears blurred Angela's vision as her heart pounded harder. She whispered to herself, "Just this once. God, forgive me." With shaking hands, she reached into the drawer and pulled out a bundle, clutching it to her chest as though it were Maya's very heartbeat. She slipped the cash into her bag and closed the drawer, her entire body trembling with fear. Walking out of the mansion that night felt like carrying a mountain on her shoulders. Every shadow looked like a guard, every sound like an alarm. But when she finally reached home and saw Maya's fragile smile, Angela knew there was no turning back. The money she carried wasn't for herself. It was the only hope her daughter had left. The morning after Angela had taken the money, the mansion was anything but quiet. The echo of hurried footsteps filled the marble halls, and whispers among the staff spread like wildfire. Victor Kane's accountant had discovered a gap in the books. Cash missing, unaccounted for. Security cameras were checked, every angle replayed, every face scrutinized. And though no one had seen Angela physically take the money, suspicion quickly circled around her. She had been the only one with access to the study that evening, the only one who lingered long enough to be near the drawer. Angela could feel the weight of the stairs as she walked through the mansion, her heart pounding in her chest. But she forced herself to remain steady, clinging to one thought: Maya. At the hospital, Angela's fears seemed to fade for a few brief hours. She clutched Maya's hand as doctors prepared her for surgery. The girl's voice was weak, but she managed to smile. "Mommy, "Don't cry," Maya whispered. "I'm going to be okay." Angela kissed her daughter's forehead, whispering back promises of a brighter tomorrow. The surgery was long, every second an eternity. Angela prayed with all her strength, pacing the cold hospital corridors, replaying every choice she had, made until her knees threatened to buckle. And then the doors opened, and the surgeon emerged with a tired but reassuring smile. The operation had been successful. Maya would live. Relief washed over Angela like a flood, tears spilling down her cheeks as she whispered endless thanks. But the relief did not last. When Angela returned to the mansion a day later, her heart light and hopeful, she was greeted not with kindness, but with silence thick as smoke. The staff avoided her eyes, their conversation stopping the moment she entered a room. She walked into Victor's office, and there he stood, tall, sharp, and unyielding, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. His cold eyes fixed on her, and his voice was like steel. "Angela," he said slowly, "you were the only one in that room. Tell me, where is my money?" The words hit her like a blow. For a moment, Angela felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. She wanted to lie, to deny everything, to find some excuse that could save her. But Victor's gaze pierced straight into her soul, and she knew there was no escape. Her lips trembled, and tears welled up as she struggled to breathe. Finally, with her voice breaking, she whispered the truth she could no longer hide. "I stole it." "I stole your money," she confessed, her body shaking. "But I didn't do it for myself. I did it for my daughter. She was dying. I had no other choice." The office fell into a suffocating silence. Angela's sobs echoed softly, her confession hanging in the air like a heavy weight. For the first time, she stood before Victor not as a maid, but as a mother, stripped of pride, begging for the one thing she could not buy: understanding. The echo of Victor's voice carried through the mansion, drawing every servant and staff member to the grand hall. His fury seemed to vibrate in the air as he faced Angela, his tone sharp enough to cut through stone. "You stole from me. Do you realize what that means?" His words were not just an accusation. They were a sentence, waiting to fall. The others stood frozen, their eyes darting between the ruthless billionaire and the trembling maid, whispering among themselves, already anticipating the destruction about to unfold. Angela's body felt weak. Her knees gave way, and she fell to the polished marble floor with a sob that broke the silence. She clasped her hands together, her tears spilling freely. "Please," she cried, her voice trembling, "fire me, punish me, even call the police if you must. But don't blame my daughter. She is innocent. I will work until my last breath, and pay back every cent if I have to." Her words rang with raw desperation, the kind that comes not from fear of losing a job, but from the terror of a mother about to lose everything. Victor stared down at her, his jaw clenched, his expression unreadable. This was the man who was known for crushing business rivals without hesitation, who destroyed anyone that dared to cross him. The staff shifted uncomfortably, some unable to even watch, certain they were about to see Angela dragged away in disgrace, her life torn apart in a single moment. Yet, as the seconds ticked by, Victor did not explode with rage. Instead, he stood in silence, his sharp eyes locked on the woman kneeling before him. His mind wandered in places no one else could see. He thought of his late wife, of the one person who had begged him to soften his heart, to use his wealth for good instead of power. He had ignored her then, believing kindness was weakness. And now, before him, was a mother who had risked everything, not for greed or luxury, but for the life of her child. Angela's sobs shook the hall as she pressed her forehead against the floor, waiting for his verdict. Every breath felt like borrowed time. The mansion held its breath with her, the staff standing still, as if the walls themselves wanted to hear what Victor would say. He moved closer, his footsteps echoing loudly, until he stood directly above. Her. The weight of his silence was unbearable, and Angela braced herself for the crushing blow. Arrest, ruin, humiliation. But instead of anger, his voice broke softer than anyone had ever heard. "Get up, Angela," he said quietly. The command was simple, but it carried an unfamiliar tremor, as if the words themselves were foreign on his tongue. She lifted her face slowly, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Victor was no longer glaring with fire in his eyes. Instead, there was something else, something that stunned even those who had worked for him for years. There was hesitation. There was thought. There was humanity. The grand hall was so still that even the ticking of the antique clock on the wall seemed too loud. Angela remained frozen on her knees, her face wet with tears, her hands trembling as she clutched them together. She had confessed everything, laid bare her soul, and now waited for the crushing blow that she believed must surely follow. Victor Kane, the billionaire who had built an empire with cold precision and ruthless decisions, looked down at her with eyes that no longer carried the same sharpness as before. For a long, unbearable silence, he said nothing. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, their breaths caught in their throats, expecting an outburst of fury at any moment. But when Victor finally spoke, his voice carried a tone none of them had ever heard. It was lower, softer, and almost trembling. "Angela," he said, each word deliberate, "when my wife was alive, she begged me to use my wealth to help others. She told me that all the money in the world means nothing if your heart is empty. I ignored her. I thought money was only power, a shield that kept me untouchable. But you," his eyes locked on Angela, who dared to lift her gaze through her tears. "You risked everything, not for greed, not for comfort, but for love. You stole not to fill your pockets, but to save your daughter's life. Do you realize what that means?" His voice cracked, the weight of his own confession shaking even him. The accountant shifted uncomfortably, already anticipating orders to press charges or cut Angela loose. But instead, Victor took a deep breath, turned his head toward the man, and gave an order that shocked everyone in the room. "Erase the debt. The money stays with her." Gasps filled the air like a wave crashing against stone. Some of the staff clutched their mouths, unable to believe what they had just heard. Angela's eyes widened in disbelief, her breath catching in her throat. "Sir?" she stammered, her voice broken. Victor stepped forward, and in an act that no one could have imagined, he knelt down in front of Angela. The billionaire, who never bowed his head to anyone, lowered himself to lift a maid off the floor. His hands, steady and firm, grasped her arms and pulled her gently to her feet. "You didn't steal from me, Angela," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "You taught me what real wealth means. It isn't in these walls, these cars, or these accounts. It's in love, in sacrifice, in family. From this day on, your daughter's medical bills are mine to cover. She will never suffer again, not while I have the means to prevent it." Angela's body shook as tears poured down her face, her sobs now mixed with gratitude instead of fear. She clasped Victor's hand as if holding on to a lifeline, her words tumbling out between cries. "Thank you. Thank you, sir. You've given her a chance to live. You've given me my child back." The staff looked on in awe, whispering among themselves, their image of the cold, ruthless Victor Kane forever shattered. And in that moment, everyone in the mansion understood a truth more powerful than wealth. It was never the maid who was poor, it had always been the billionaire's heart that was empty. Until now.